Hello folks, welcome to Jeremy Hadler's YouTube channel. I'm your host Jeremy Hadler, and in today's video, I'm going to bring the famous concept Moneyball to the NFL. Now, what's Moneyball, you may ask? Have you ever seen the book Moneyball or the movie Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill? So what I'm going to be bringing here about what Moneyball is a data-driven approach to evaluate players to identify undervalued assets. So what I mean by is obviously nobody knew about Patrick Mahomes when he was drafted. That's undervalued asset. Whereas you look at Patrick Mahomes today, his value and his market value exponentially went up higher and higher. So he's trying to find him at the right moment before he's bid out and bought out from other bigger paying teams. And that was the concept with baseball about the Los Angeles Dodgers, New York Yankees. They have all the money they want to spend on the biggest great players that they already have. Whereas Oakland Athletics, they didn't have the money. They had the budget probably of one player for the Dodgers. So basically, you take the salary of one player on the Dodgers, that's the entire budget of the Oakland Athletics. It's an unfair game. There's an epidemic failure to the game to understand what is really happening, as Jonah Hill says. And your goal shouldn't be to buy players. Your goal should be buying wins. In order to buy wins, you got to get to that championship level. When you get to buy the wins, you get the championship there. So that's what I'm bringing here today for the NFL. I want to bring that in my research here. So what I did for my research was going through last season on how much NFL teams spent on their offense, defense, and special teams, and compare that to the amount of wins they got last season in the very season. Also going to be having scatter plots to help out and put out for you guys as well at the end of the video to visualize, do they make the playoffs? Do they not make playoffs? What was their profit margin? And that is through wins versus losses here and how far they went. And what I use as my data information was I got from Spotrac. So shout out to them. Pretty good source to use when you're doing this. And so I wanted to build my own data machine for that process. So I went through all of the different positions of going through quarterback, wide receiver, running back, O-line, tight end. And that's also going for the defense, special teams, how much was spent all combined on each spot of those areas here. So that's what I looked at was really the cash value spent here, real money. So what I mean by that is the total dollars a player receives in a specific year, including signing bonuses, base salary, roster bonuses. Not the cap space and the dead cap, because that's future. You could always create space, always not. It's future. But what I wanted to look at, how much did they actually spend from last year? But before I start, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you already done so already, and basically to remind the audience once again, what I'm looking at is how small budget teams, can they compete with big teams in the NFL? Does that effect come in the NFL? It already does with baseball, but does that happen in the NFL wise? And so we're going through it to share my screen and everything. And now I show you my screen of my whole data information from last season through all the numbers here that I used from Spotrac to see the cash value. Here's what we're looking at again. I put the cap space and dead cap just to give you an idea if you want to look at for fun wise. Same thing with active roster, dead roster cash, and went through the total amount. So the total amount for offense spent is the combination of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, O-line, for example. Same thing for defense, of course, right here. And then you got special teams to finish it out with here. Pretty cool to see. Again, what we're looking at here is seeing key figures that are outliers to see, did the Moneyball effect work or not in some specific areas? So, for example, if I want to see who was the most spent for offense, and I believe that was the Philadelphia Eagles last year, you spent $202 million on offense. Did it work the year prior? Yes, it did, because they won the Super Bowl. But did it work last season? No, it did not. And that's through, again, the combinations of the players they had through Hurts, Barkley, the receivers of Brown, Smith. You got great O-line and everything, and tight end. It didn't work out. And there's a lot of issues that occur for that. You look at the 49ers, for example, another heavily spent team. But the offense did produce. Same thing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They had great offenses there. They spent a lot of money on that compared to 49ers, they didn't spend so much on the defense. Same thing with the Philadelphia Eagles. This is one of the biggest differences that I saw of looking at how much offense is spent compared to defense for teams. Eagles spent over triple amount pretty much, or even more on offense or defense. You spend about $81 million on defense and $202 on offense. Pretty ridiculous to see that. And what succeeded more was the defense than the offense last year. So it's remarkable to see how much you spend on the money when you think it's going to be useful and work well for you. It did not. And when you use less money, apparently for this case, it worked for the defense here. So again, what we're looking at is how they value the per position wise, how much they spent for each team and everything. So pretty cool to see for the offense wise. And then to go for the defense here to see, as we already just saw with the Eagles, big difference gaps here. So if I want to go see for most expensive was the Denver Broncos last year, $180 million. Did that work out? Yes, the defense did work out for them. So that's the good stuff. So yeah, there are key outliers to see how much teams spent on. Like Patriots, we see here. They spent $169 million on their defense, which is pretty insane to see for a big young talent wise. They still got the job done and got to go Super Bowl and won the AFC. Pretty successful year despite losing the Super Bowl. So that's something the key interesting things I like to look at is how much we spend the difference here. The Eagles, again, were the biggest difference I really saw was very less on defense, so much on offense. Looking at success-wise, 101 total on that process. And so if I want to look at who was the best on special teams spend here, I think my team's going to be right up there for that. And that's, again, not a great case, but luckily the Packers got rid of their special teams coordinator. So that's all good process there. The most spent that I saw was, okay, 12.44 million. Yeah, that's my team in a second most, of course. But the most spent was the Seahawks. So, and they paid off for that with Rashid Shaheed coming into that effect. Really paid off $13.49 million. Pretty good. Pretty good to see that wise. So, yeah. And that's not including Rashid Shaheed for his like putting him in here. Again, it's the punter, kicker, and long snapper because with like Rashid Shaheed, it mixes up because that's also counting for the receivers. That's also counting for other positions he might play. So those are three key areas that usually would see for the special teams. Yeah, Seahawks, again, they were great on the punting, great for the kicking. Long snapper did a terrific job and everything. So pretty good stuff there. And then if I want to go see, for example, again, let's see here. For quarterback spend, we're just going to see right quick because this is what everyone talks about to see how much they spend. And this is the key fact to see because quarterbacks are cheap when they get drafted here. They get very cheap when they get drafted and they don't have the big contracts. So, for example, Texans, Broncos, Panthers, Patriots, Bears, you got all these cheap guys that have not gotten their big contracts yet. And that is a big, big influence of how teams are spending their money. Gives them other areas to spend at. Where you look at the Chargers, for example, $64 million on Justin Herbert. So you look through that process to see how the cheapness went and everything. Like Packers, for example, they spent $15.19 million on the quarterback room. That's pretty outstanding to see, folks. That's pretty outstanding to see for that. So when I did my research on this, I was shocked to see some of these things happen here. Like the total amount spent for offense, defense, special teams, $8.9 billion. There are only 4 NFL teams that are valued more than that. The Giants, the Patriots, the Rams, and the Cowboys. That's ridiculous. 4 teams are valued higher than the total spent. Again, it really shows you of how teams spent their money. And we look at this again here to see who spent the money. So if I want to see from combining, again, the offense, the defense, and the special teams all together and point out the total here. And again, these are totals like I mentioned before here. To see the total amount, the Jacksonville Jaguars spent the most amount of money on everything with $346 million. Combine everything. Did it work for them? Yes, because they went 13-4, had a profit margin of 9, and they made the playoffs. If I were to go for a team that did not do well and somehow still ended up with a winning record, the Minnesota Vikings right down below. Did not work out for them. And this is what kills the Vikings even more because they lost Sam Darnold. They could have re-signed him. They could have also brought back Daniel Jones, who was good until his injury. Pretty bad for the Viking fans. Luckily, I'm not a Vikings fan. As a great Packers fan I am, I can appreciate that as a Packer fan. But that's what's crazy, folks. That's what's really crazy to see how much teams spent. Like the Seahawks, $258 million. That's below the average. And they didn't have to spend so much more money like the Patriots, for example. The Patriots were one of the top teams in spending the money. So right here they are. They spent $316 million on that total team. And yes, there is like a couple teams that had to spend a lot of money, like the Philadelphia Eagles had to spend a lot of money. Chiefs, they won the Super Bowls past couple years. You're bound to have that when you're at the peak of your level and it's starting to fall and crumble here. But the Seahawks, that's the amazing thing I found in this research. Same thing with the Rams. They were the two outliers in how much total money was spent by being one of the teams to spend the least amount of money in that process, still gain a great margin in that process. Look at the Cardinals, -11 the profit margin, spend more than the Cardinals. Raiders, terrible. Jets, terrible. Rams, great. The cheapest was the Saints, but again, they didn't do well in that process. But it's really interesting to see the Rams and the Seahawks as the outliers, guys. That's what's really fascinating about that. And that's what I can appreciate here. And I'm going to be putting up the graphics really quick after I turn this off here. It's pretty amazing to see that, guys. Really is to see what the NFL teams are using with their money to spend on per position, how they want to spend it for defense, offense, special teams, and putting that all together to see, does that lead to success on the field? Now, I do think coaching and culture and having other things counts, but with the cash spend, it doesn't guarantee anything. What it can do is create opportunities for how you spent the money. The Seahawks use that money and create opportunities to win the Super Bowl, whereas other teams, they thought they were getting guarantees. No good guarantees came out of that for some teams. It really is interesting to see how that's constructed of your roster, development, leadership aligned to see how the total dollars are spent. And so to put up the graphic here, once again, give you visual perspective here of NFL team spending versus success, and that includes playoffs and records here. So as I'm showing you this graphic here to align with you, you got the blue area. That is telling me it's a playoff team, and they also had a winning record-wise. They also had a winning record. I mean, there is one casual. There is the outlier with the Panthers who went 8-9, even though that's a whole nother story of how that occurred, and I don't want to get into it. So, yeah. And then the yellow means they won. They had a winning record, but didn't make the playoffs. And that was the Vikings and the Lions. So that's great as a Packer fan, but unfortunate for those two teams. Sorry, not sorry, unfortunately. And then you get to the red here, folks. That is the losing team. Did not do much out of that. But it shows you how much the amount of money was spent is the ridiculous part. As we look through it again, you got the Jaguars, you got the Vikings here. And then again, we're seeing the outliers here with the Seahawks, the Rams I just mentioned before. And then show you the offense again here. The biggest spent one, as we mentioned before, the really big outlier was the Philadelphia Eagles, even though the offense wasn't great. And then you look at the bottom part where we're looking at again, you got the Texans, the Panthers, the Broncos, the Seahawks, Steelers. Yes, you did make the playoffs, but not great on offense, unfortunately. Didn't make you go far run. And then you look at the Rams, you look at the Bills, and how much is spent. So it's really, again, interesting to see that. Then defense-wise, it's scattered all over. Like for average to expense. And then the two outliers are like for the defense-wise, like they didn't have to spend a lot of money, was the Seahawks and the Rams. They spent a lot of that in draft capital value. And one of the big things that came from that for the Seahawks was the Russell Wilson trade. That played into effect, folks. So really interesting to see how that all played out there. And then for fun, to give you special teams, because I know some people don't care about special teams, but I'm here to give it to you, folks. I'm here to give it to you. For special teams, it is a mixed bag, honestly. It really has not really played a bigger factor. Unlike my team there, it didn't do well, but we had a great punter. That's what I can say about our special teams there. But it really didn't make a huge difference, honestly, unless you're really expanding it like the Seahawks did. Whereas the Patriots, they were the least amount spent. So it's really interesting for the Super Bowl teams-wise. Patriots were the least amount spent, and the Seahawks were the most spent. So, again, Patriots spend more as the total team roster, more and more, but the Seahawks spent more on the position-wise for that process. Well, that'll wrap it up here, folks. Again, really interesting to see how the outliers play out. And so to, again, answer the question to start this video, does Moneyball exist in the NFL? Absolutely exist in the NFL. And there's different ways you can play it through the offense, defense, special teams, and how much you spent. It's all about finding those valuable players and seeing, can they contribute to the team before they're expired, but how do they evaluate that in the money spend wise? Really interesting to see that. So love to hear it. And again, it definitely takes more than just a roster construction. It takes development, it takes leadership. It takes a lot. Head coaching takes a lot of that, folks. So that is my story on the Moneyball. Let me know if you're interested in learning more about it, and I can go through the last 5 years for each NFL team, probably for another video. But really, this is the interesting part about with Moneyball, is it's basically Dave versus Goliath, how much you spend versus poor teams versus high spending teams. Goliath, you expect him to win. You expect him to win every single time. But the pleasure of rooting for David is the underdog, the upset guy, where you don't know what to expect, but you at least stand a chance to be inspired to see what happens. So that is all I have again for the video here, folks. Appreciate everyone tuning in. Love to hear it in the chat here. Make sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so already. Would appreciate it. And have a great day, everybody. Appreciate it.